Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and this is kind of one of these topics that actually genuinely upsets me a little bit, man. When I read something like this, it definitely makes me a little bit mad to see that this is kind of how society has, I guess, gotten down to these situations, right? Because I feel like most of us can come with like the most logical conclusion of what should happen in cases like this. Like most of us can take a look at, all the facts of this whole thing here, and we can come up with a much better solution to the problem than even the court system here in the United States did, than the government of our country did, right? And if I sound a little bit off in my videos for the next few days, I've been dealing with a lot of throat pain recently, and my voice is a little scratchy, so bear with me, but so if you live in the United States, you probably know that for the last few years especially, the whole country has been kind of suffering from this massive opioid epidemic, where millions of Americans have become addicted to opioids like heroin, fentanyl, pretty much any of them, it doesn't really matter, but there's been like this massive resurgence in addictions to these drugs pretty much during my lifetime. Since 1999, I believe the addiction rate for opioids has quadrupled. And from 1999 to 2019, opioid overdoses were credited with killing 500,000 Americans. For comparison's sake, the total amount of deaths in the United States to COVID-19 is around 603,000. So that's a pretty big number, man. That's a lot of people who realistically should have never died, right? Like their addictions should have never happened. In an ideal society, people don't become addicted to things like this that kill them and take their entire futures away from them and devastate their families. It just wouldn't happen, but unfortunately we do live in the world where that kind of stuff does happen. So I think a pretty massive factor in the opioid epidemic that a lot of people didn't really realize is the roles that these pharmaceutical companies actually played in not only propping this whole thing up, but continuing a massive epidemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, not even including the, countless millions of Americans that have probably become addicted to an opioid at some point during this entire thing and have recovered and things like that. So one of these companies that was massively responsible for basically promoting this opioid epidemic in our country was Johnson & Johnson. In fact, they were so responsible for part of this epidemic that they actually were hit with a massive lawsuit from New York State. Now, their state's attorney general claimed that the pharmaceutical company played a massive role in, prescribing these medications during the opioid epidemic to a point that it helped fuel this entire thing. And now you might be sitting there thinking, well, Optimus, I mean, there's great news, right? Like these guys, they got hit with this lawsuit and they settled. In fact, they did actually settle just recently for $230 million in this entire deal. So justice has been served, right? Well, I mean, no, not really. Not at all, actually. So according to research online, this is Statista, and of course there are the actual stock financial releases and things like that for the company. In 2020, Johnson & Johnson as a company had net earnings of about $14.7 billion with a B dollars. We're talking about a very, very insignificant fraction of even just 1 year's earnings for this company being taken from them for fueling a multi-decade resurgence in opioid addictions. In fact, when you compare the percentage of money that they paid in this settlement for their yearly income last year, if you compare that percentage to the average median income here in the United States, this would be the equivalent of the average American paying about a $500 fine. So essentially, Johnson & Johnson got a high-grade traffic ticket for, being partially responsible for the deaths of 500,000 Americans. Now, on top of that, part of this settlement basically also came through that Johnson & Johnson claims no wrongdoing. They don't have to take any responsibility for their actions or for the consequences of their actions. But there's also going to be no jail sentences whatsoever. In fact, realistically, the only thing that happened to Johnson & Johnson that will actually hurt them in the long run is the settlement prevents them from manufacturing or selling opioids in New York, and they're also not allowed to promote opioids or opioid-related products in New York. But it's okay because the company announced last year that they were going to discontinue their production and sale of pain medication in the United States. So everything's fine, right? Hundreds of thousands of dead Americans, countless people who have had their lives destroyed, have gotten drug charges for being addicted to these opioids, have lost out on potential job opportunities, have, destroyed their relationships with their families, have become homeless, pretty much anything. Those things are hardly accounted for if you really consider it. And Johnson & Johnson has claimed no responsibility throughout this entire thing, is not being forced to, has only really been affected by one state independently. Of course, it is one of the largest states in the United States, but even then. Another pretty crazy fact is that according to a claim filed last summer in bankruptcy court by almost every state in the union and also some of our territories, a claim was made that opioid manufacturers like Johnson & Johnson have actually cost the American economy $2.15 trillion. According to data from the Department of Education in the United States, forgiving all federal loans to students would cost around $1.6 trillion. Put that into perspective. Had money that not been costed from the United States economy by these greedy fucking companies that literally killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, had that not happened, we would essentially have made the money back into the US economy to forgive all student loans in the country, to forgive all student debt. And we would still have money left over. When people talk about how much the pharmaceutical industry honestly fucks up the United States, how much damage that it does to the country in some way or another, it really isn't an overstatement. It's not dramatized in any way. This is real. This is real shit that's going on. These companies do not give a fuck about anyone's health. They do not care if you become addicted. They don't care if your problems subside. In fact, realistically, these companies want you to remain sick. They want you to remain dependent on medication and shit like that so they can continue to make you a customer. And part of the crossfire of that greedy fucking mentality that the healthcare system in the United States has promoted is now hundreds of thousands of Americans. Do you think Johnson & Johnson was hurt by this settlement because they can't sell shit in one state, which they already had announced they were going to stop doing nationally after the fallout started to begin, when people realized how responsible they might have just been? You think $230 million is hurting one of the largest corporations on planet Earth? They could make that shit back in like one good week. And you think that that's something that's going to hurt them? This is not justice. This does nothing to provide any answers to our country for what's happened. It does nothing to address the destruction that it's wreaked on our society. It's done nothing to address the rampant addiction rates that have crushed families, that have crushed people's lives quite literally down into graves, that have destroyed flow of money back into the economy that we desperately needed. But it's okay because this company made a shit ton of money during that time, right? And in all reality, that $230 million is a drop in the bucket compared to what they've probably made in total just throughout this entire epidemic. I think more people really need to start waking up and realizing just how fucked up the pharmaceutical industry is. Just the kind of shady tactics that they use, not only to kind of keep people sick and dependent, but also to make money at the expense of the general public's health. Addiction is one of the hardest things that you can overcome. If you've never been personally affected by addiction, if you've never, seen people in your neighborhood overdose in fucking front yards from heroin and fentanyl, if you've never driven down the street and had people nodding off walking into the middle of the road and you almost hit them, if you haven't witnessed a loved one do some shit like that, you really don't understand just how horrible of an epidemic this country really has been dealing with. And it seems like no one really gives a fuck. People don't care. People don't actually look into this. People don't give a fuck about what's going on. I think because they assume that the government's going to handle it. And as you can see right here, the government didn't do shit to handle this. They've done nothing to provide any answers, to provide any sort of, repair to the problem. And when the next epidemic of addictions pop up and these pharmaceutical companies are somehow partially or fully responsible for the outbreak that really kind of happens, hopefully people will start to kind of fucking realize and open their eyes a little bit and kind of see what's going on. Because this isn't shit to play around about. This is stuff people should be taking seriously. But anyways, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch, add sub to Optimus. Make sure to check out Shop Opti down below. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, talking about Johnson & Johnson, and signing out.